Welcome to Krome Cast. Take it out. I'm Sam Major, Commercial Director for Krome Technologies. I'm joined once again by Ben Randall, Technical Director, to talk about password management, best practices and ensuring security inside your organisation. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me.
So we're here today to talk about everything passwords, and let's be honest, everything we do, personal work, requires some sort of password validation, and there's all sorts of tools and best practices to protect our data. It's constantly evolving, but if we can briefly, and difficult with you and I know, but briefly discuss the risks that are involved, and why is it important, especially to our clients, that they have strong password management measures in place?
Well, the main risk to business or to an individual, having your data compromised. What the attackers are doing is they can, if they gain access to your password, they can gain access to your data, and from that they can either exfiltrate your data and sell that on the dark web for profit, or they can encrypt your data, preventing you to have access to it, and demand a ransom for its return, or for encryption keys to get it returned.
Yeah, I mean, and that's becoming more and more common. Obviously, you see the large ones in the press, the Adobe, the British Airways, to name but a few. But it's not just the large organisations that are a threat. I know personally we've seen it in small organisations as well. They've been breached, ransomware, etc. It's a costly thing to get out of, or it's costly to have to give up the fact you no longer have access to your data. That's a big problem. And actually, there's some pretty big stats that I can't remember off the top of my head, Ben, so I actually wrote them down, so I'm going to cheat. But records compromised in 2020 exceeded 37 billion, which was a 141% increase on the previous year, which is astronomical, but it shows you there's clearly a market for this. And the scariest stat, I guess, is that 80% of these breaches were a direct result of weak passwords. See, there's several different layers of the security tool set, and whilst we could talk about all of them, but today we're focusing on password security. So with that level of data breaches that we're specifically seeing now, 141% increase is incredible. And being, I guess, particularly related to weak passwords, how can organisations enforce stronger password measures?
Yeah. So indeed, having a comprehensive set of tools and policies in place to protect your systems is critical. But unfortunately, if people are not following good password practices, they're or educated or making the right choices, then you're leaving your systems open to attack. There are a few recommendations we make to clients. There's firstly to invest in password management tools. There are a few on the market, like we're looking at LastPass, KeyPass. They enable your users to save passwords and not have to memorize every single one. This can improve the password hygiene. We'll come into that a little bit later. But our recommendation, this would be Psychotic Secret Server. This is a full password management tool where we can control access to shared passwords, so that members of the team can use those passwords without actually necessarily knowing what they are. We can control that via Active Directory and other tools. It also enables you to create complex passwords which are not easily remembered, but in that situation where no person has to actually remember it, that's probably the best way forward. So to have you can follow the basic rules of improved passwords, which are harder to brute force or guess.
Okay, and actually just talking about it, and to throw this into a loop and go completely off script, but if you have a team that can be transient, you have admins that come and go, I guess it's a lot more secure to have a system like that than actually giving new people the keys to the kingdom when you don't necessarily know or trust that employee as yet.
Absolutely. I mean, and there are certain passwords which are a pain to change, which may be used by multiple users. So a single member of the team changes and you have to change all those passwords. Yeah. If none of those people necessarily actually know what the password is, and it's only known by the trusted few, then that's fine.
And let's say you get a disgruntled employee, they can actually do no damage, etc., etc.
That's the idea.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So you mentioned about complex passwords there. Now I know specifically we used to have a vendor manager whose password was legitimately password 1, and then they forced a quarterly password change. It became password 2, and then 3, 4, and so on and so forth, right? So that clearly doesn't constitute a secure password. But from my understanding, from being around intelligent people like yourself, is actually the longer the password, actually the less chance it is of being crackable, right? So I guess, is that the case? And in your opinion, what constitutes that kind of strong password?
Yeah, absolutely. A long password is good. At least 12 characters these days. A short 8-character password is quite easily guessable, even if it's random characters.
So but that's, I'm assuming, with the software utility that will just sit there and...
Absolutely, yeah. So we're talking about not just a single computer, entire botnets trying to calculate and guessing at passwords.
And it goes from like 30 minutes for an 8-character to something like 1 trillion years for a 16-character.
A very high number.
Yeah,
anyway,
long enough to be safe, right? I think
yes,
1 trillion years was
yeah.
probably sufficient.
Absolutely. So a long password that isn't a dictionary word.
Okay.
And doesn't follow an easy pattern of substitution, so like zeros for O's and things like that, because they will be in known dictionary lists which are used. So, our recommendation of the National Security Centre also have a recommendation about making a password. If you have to remember it, make it 3, 4, 5 words which you can remember, which are not necessarily related, not just a sentence.
Okay.
And then you can add some extra complexity, like some capital letters, some punctuation marks, that sort of thing.
I know someone that used to actually, when they had to change a password, they looked at from right to left what was on their desk, and it would be like phone, pad, nail file, monitor type thing.
Indeed.
It's one way of doing it, because it saves you, as we've all seen, unfortunately, people that have the post-it note of password stuck.
Favourite.
Yeah, not ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing to consider is you don't use your personal details, pet names, date of birth, things like that. That sort of information is essentially easy to find online, especially with social media, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it gives it away.
Yeah, don't recycle passwords. So, for example, if your Facebook account uses a given password, and you use that on your banking and you use that on your LinkedIn and everywhere else, if Facebook has a breach and your password leaks out that combination, then all those other sites are breached as well.
Yeah.
It's unique passwords. You should always use a unique password for every application.
Okay.
And this is where the password manager becomes useful, because the chances are you're not going to remember all those passwords unless you use them very frequently.
Yeah.
And so using the password manager means you don't have to keep up with remembering all that yourself.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I know, and I'm guilty of that for certain things myself. Not for banking and whatnot, but I'll be honest with my social media password. If you knew one, you're into them all. So something I should definitely do myself and practicing what we preach. So just mentioned there around obviously passwords and how easy the short ones are to crack and how complex it can be, but the fact that people are using things like bot networks to brute force their way into the systems. Can you explain, and I don't think you're very keen on the word hackers, but how do hackers, how do they do that?
Yeah, well, there's basically we're looking at brute force attack is involving a computer just guessing multiples of password to password 1, password 2, password 3, and continue adding characters all the way through. There's also dictionary attacks where it's got a huge list of known passwords. So these breaches from well-known websites which have been publicised, those databases of millions of passwords will automatically be guessed in all those because there are very common passwords, even though you might think it's not common, it's actually very commonly used. They will be guessed at for a start, and then you have things like credential stuffing, where you have multiple different machines trying those attacks from different IP addresses. So in other words, you could have a rate controlled a website which will say, I'll 3 guesses at a password from this IP address. The 4th one will get blocked anyway, but they will randomize that attack. Okay. So they increasing their ability to get the number of guesses they get for an account before it locks out.
Blimey, that's scary.
Indeed, using the power of multiple computers, it means it really multiplies the power they can put into
a billion burglars trying to get into your house versus one.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. What we haven't covered is, and I know this has changed recently, and internally I've seen a change the way we do it, is the cadence of how often we should change those passwords. That, you used to get the reminder saying it's expiring in X amount of days, please change it. I know recommendations have changed, government recommendations, Cyber Essentials Plus recommendations, etc. What is our belief or Cyber Essentials, etc., and the differences as to how often we should be amending those passwords?
Yeah, indeed. Again, the National Security Centre have say that regular password changes are a thing which haven't stood the test of time. If you ask users to change their password every week, what's going to happen? They're not going to remember. They're going to get the post-it note. So basically, what you do is you ensure that the users are using a unique password for each thing, so they're not reusing the password everywhere. It's a nice long secure password that they can remember, so they don't need to write it down.
Yeah.
And
or get it reset every 5 minutes by IT.
Yeah, exactly. And that means that they're able to remember it. So you don't have to enforce those password changes. It encourages good practice with those passwords which they're using.
Okay.
Obviously, having said that, if there is a known compromise of a password, it should be changed immediately.
Yeah.
And when someone leaves the company, for example, their account should be disabled. I mean, these are all basic good practice anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. So outside the password best practice recommendations, there are of course additional ways that organisations can layer on credential security. I'm thinking of two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication solutions. Can you talk through the options available there, and I guess what our recommendations are as a business that we take out to our customers?
Yeah, indeed. Multi-factor authentication, or two-factor authentication, as it's commonly used to be called, is a really valuable tool. Basically, it means that you've got something your password, and something that you have. So it'd be your multi-factor application, your mobile phone with running the MFA application, or your phone which receives an SMS message. And we've all had that with our banking, receive a code. So if someone has your username and password and they try and log in, they won't have that other device, so they don't have that ability. And also we have smart tokens like the YubiKey type device, type token devices that you plug in, or the time-based code generation, which is another feature where you can have that on your phone, where you type in a code that is only valid for 30 seconds in addition to username and password.
So obviously there's a few options there, and you are right. I'm sure everyone watching will have had the using your phone, your thumbprint, your face, your passcodes, etc., etc. But what do we recommend as an organisation, or I guess does that depend on the kind of size and type of organisation?
Yeah, I think it's probably around the situation where you're likely to be using it. I mean, for example, if you're using an SMS or application-based two-factor, where the device has to have a mobile phone signal to be able to receive the signal, and you're likely to be using, the person who's going to use it isn't somewhere where there's going to be any signal, it's not going to work very well. So in that case, the time-based the time-based code which is generated, or the actual physical key, that would probably be better. Obviously, depending on the solution, it may be possible that you have the preference is the app where you signal yes, okay, let me in, but then you have the fallback, so that doesn't work, it goes to the next. So we have multiple ways of using, of leverage,
I'm with you.
applications such as the Microsoft MFA actually provide that in many cases for Office 365.
Different options you can use from MFA's product.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess we're looking at the different types of customers we have. As we know, we've got some people that are out in the jungle, in the desert, etc., and actual signal to SMS would be impossible.
Yeah.
People in London, that's not so much of a problem. So I guess that's just assessing where they are and what's the best recommendation to make at any given time.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I mean, that's again interesting. There are a few things that organisations will need to consider. So outside of technology and tools, the critical factor in this is, as always, is the human element. And we've recently done a podcast on on phishing, and trying to educate people on how to recognise phishing attacks, And obviously, you know, we talk about the breaches here being predominantly the human element, etc.
Absolutely.
Same with phishing. The stats on that are quite shocking. But, you know, it seems to me that education is the most relevant piece here.
Absolutely. I mean, the people are always the best
We're always the
resource.
problem.
Yeah, we are the problem in the technology environment. But yes, so education of your users to spot a suspicious email. Sometimes they're very convincing. It's just to be on your guard as to anything that's unexpected. You know, why would I need to put my credentials in here?
Yeah.
You know, we all receive them all the time in our spam filter. You've only got to look through to see examples of it.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if anybody doesn't get them.
No, not in this day and age.
No.
But again, like I say, it's just to spot them, and same with any type of access. It's the education of the humans to make sure that they are undertaking the correct behaviours.
Absolutely. Testing of your users can be very telling. Actually, running a campaign where you do a false phishing campaign and you see the results of that. I mean, we run them internally.
Yeah.
Let's face it.
Yeah.
And I know plenty of other places that do too, with varying results.
And we've run them for a number of people now, and it's always interesting to run them, then educate people, then run them again, and then see what impact it has, or in some cases hasn't had.
Yeah.
Okay. So look, lots of good content there today, lots of informative stuff. But if we, to kind of wrap up and take that last piece of information from your brain, if there was one thing that you would recommend to our audience that they should take away from this, or consider, or change, or do something to impact, what would it be?
I think it'd be around educating your users, making sure that there's policies in place to enforce longer passwords, making the users aware that they mustn't reuse passwords, educating the users the dangers of phishing emails, and as things develop, and just how bad things are if your password gets out.
Yeah, and let's be honest, this isn't get no easier. The technology to tempt people and to trick people and to crunch these passwords and take it will only get better and better and stronger. This has been hopefully very interesting. I certainly found it interesting, and I think there's a common assumption that people think it won't happen to them, and unfortunately, you and I all too often are having those phone calls with people where it has happened. So people need to take this seriously. Need to be thinking about that length of password, the security tools like Thycotic, which can really help bolt down some of these problems of staff rotation or staff that have got an axe to grind or whatever it might be. I totally agree. Have the right tools, layers of protection in place, but that education piece is probably the strongest takeaway that people really should focus on.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of Krome Cast. Check it out. If there's anything you'd like us to cover in future episodes, then please remember to comment below and we'll take that on board. Like, comment, share, and please subscribe and join us again next time on Krome Cast. Check it out.